All right, traders. One of the messages I receive a lot is from traders asking why their Sierra chart feels slower or laggy. This is pretty much always user error in the way that things are set up. I quite often am sent chart books. I make changes and I send them back to the trader. I'm going to show you pretty much all the common settings changes that improve the performance on an incorrectly set up chart book. So first of all, most of the time you can overload a chart book with plenty of charts and studies, and overall it will run quickly and feel smooth. You might sometimes run into some lag, so let's go through some of the main settings to keep the performance high. These are not required. You don't have to make these changes, but if you do experience lag, it's a good idea to run through some of these changes. If we open this chart here, you'll notice this study is using transparent fills. In general, anything where the draw style is transparent is not great for performance. So I'll open up the study settings and I'll switch to the subgraphs menu up here at the top. And you'll notice these are all transparent fills. I'm going to switch these to solid. That should help with the performance, especially if you have many of them added. Now let's talk about chart drawings and excessive widths on those drawings. You can add a number of drawings to charts and you shouldn't run into issues, but if you do, it's a good idea to keep charts pretty clean. And you'll see, for example, that these horizontal lines, if I right click it and go to line width, we want to make sure to keep them 1 or 2 when possible. When you go on these bigger sizes, that can cause issues. So try and stick with 2 when possible. And just delete old drawings that you don't need. Certain tools are known to cause some CPU issues, such as ellipse and a few other extending rectangles if you have too many of them. A few other fans tools as well can cause issue. So just be aware of how many tools you have drawn on the chart at one time. And clean up your charts when you're done. This chart is now cleaned up. Let's move on to this chart here. So some studies, such as the volume by price study, which is the volume profile, they can be pretty demanding. You can see here it's at 55 milliseconds. So if I open up the study settings for the volume by price study, if I navigate over here, we can see this setting right here, number of days to calculate volume profiles is set to 0, which is all. So if this chart loads 60 days, you're going to have 60 volume profiles on the chart. Now, how often are you really going to need to look back on the full 60 days? Probably not so much. So let's just switch this to a lower number. Definitely don't keep it at 0 for the most part. Let's just say even 10 would be good. You don't have to keep it this low, but just keep it as low as you realistically can. So I'll set this to 10. And I'm aware here on this chart as well that we use the bid and ask depth bars study. If you add too many of these to a workspace, that's probably going to hinder performance. There are just some studies that are more intensive. So having too many of certain studies is going to slow things down. So I'm only going to keep the one bid and ask depth bars study. Now this chart also has a spreadsheet that is used for various calculations. All spreadsheet studies have a number of rows setting. If this number is too high, that can also be tough on performance. So keep that as low as you possibly can. In the thousands is still fine, but for this example, I'm just going to set it to 200 because I don't need to calculate more than 200 rows at once. You can see that also brought down the milliseconds as well. On the topic of spreadsheets, it can actually be slower. You can see in the bottom right here of the workspace, I have a spreadsheet visible. You can keep them visible, but it's potentially a little bit more demanding to keep them visible. So you could, for example, minimize it, and that's going to potentially help as well. Moving on to the next chart, I'll open this chart. Now, sometimes what I notice is some people just have a ton of studies and they don't actually really need them or use them anymore. Maybe they kept them open at one time. It's a good idea to just do spring cleaning sometimes. So I'm just going to remove studies I know I don't need anymore and just clean things up a bit. Do that for all your charts. Now, the other thing is some studies, such as color background based on alert condition, you'll notice some studies have this number of bars to calculate. We want to keep that number relatively low when possible. For example, I definitely don't need 20,000 bars worth of data calculated all the time. So I'm just going to put this right down to 50. It doesn't have to be that low, but I like to keep these numbers as low as possible. That's going to really speed things up, especially if you use multiple of these studies that have a bars to calculate setting within it. Now, the other thing about this chart and all charts is that the more bars that you have visible, that can start to also increase demand. So if you don't need to have it so zoomed out, it's definitely better to have things a little more zoomed in. They don't all have to be excessively zoomed in, but if you have all your charts very zoomed out, it's just more demanding. So try and zoom in your charts as much as you can. Now let's move on to the DOM. I'm going to open up the chart settings for the DOM. And if I navigate to the market depth menu, you can see that maximum market depth days to load is 10. You can leave that, but you can also lower it right down. And then you can also adjust the depth levels. If you don't use any market depth, just keeping that at 1 is fine. But if you have market depth and you just load them all, that's definitely going to be more demanding. So even if you trade with depth, just keeping that at a lower number, such as 10 or 15 around there, is definitely going to be better than loading 300 levels of depth for that market. This applies for not just the DOM, but all charts as well. I'm going to switch over to the data limiting menu. Now, this is probably the most important setting, I would say, when it comes to people complaining about speed and lag and startup times. This number needs to be as low as it can be for each chart. So you might have TP or higher time frame charts that do need more days. So let's say it needs 30 days. That's fine. Sierra chart can handle that. But for example, your DOM doesn't need 30 days. And so go through every single chart on your chart book and keep this as low as it possibly can be. Now, keep in mind, if you keep it at something around 2 or 3, if there's a long weekend, on that Monday, your chart will appear blank because you're only loading 2 days of data. So just keep that in mind, that it will be blank until the market opens. But in general, keep this number as low as it can be for every chart. Go through all your charts. Then I'm going to switch to the display menu at the top of the chart settings. And another big mistake I see is people just leave this at 0 for all their charts. So whatever the global setting is for chart update interval, people just leave it at 0 and they don't even think about it. Now, I sort of view charts as either trigger low time frame charts that demand fast speeds, and then you have your higher time frame analysis charts that don't need to be so quickly updated. So a trigger chart might be somewhere closer to 100 or less, or if you use DOMs, you might put that even less than 100. But then you have other charts such as candlestick charts and TPO, and you definitely don't need to keep such a low value. Up in the 300s, 500s, even 1,000 in some cases, that's just going to be much better for Sierra chart. So go through all your charts, and for your trigger charts, you might want to have them close to 100. And for all other charts, you might want to raise that number, but don't just have them all stuck to global, which is 0. You can also switch to the performance menu, and you can keep tabs on the performance. If you have lag and don't know where it's coming from, you can go through some of your charts and check these values for the chart. If they seem excessively high into the hundreds, then something's probably off. It shouldn't really be more than 100 for most general use charts. And that extends over to the studies that you have added to the chart. So that was the chart settings performance, but you also want to be monitoring the milliseconds that's listed for every study on every chart. These are all low numbers, 11 milliseconds, 0, 0. So sometimes if you see a study that's closer to 100 or above, that can definitely add noticeable lag to your Sierra chart. Another important performance consideration for Sierra chart is using a solid state drive or an SSD. If you have Sierra chart on a hard drive with a disk, it's just not optimal. So definitely have a solid state drive, and the best and the highest performance choice you can make is actually having Sierra chart on its own dedicated SSD, but that's definitely not required. It's just a bonus. Another common issue is having too many time and sales records. Some people have this number way up. I'm going to go to global settings, data trade service settings, common settings, and you can see down here we have number of stored time and sales records is 5,000, which is probably fine. Some people have that number even higher. There's no real reason to keep that over even 2,000, 3,000. It's not really necessary, but definitely don't have this number be some huge number like 20,000. Keep that number low. Another consideration is enabling OpenGL for Sierra chart. This is going to utilize your graphics card more than just your CPU. To turn it on, I'm going to go to SC menu, chart, graphics settings, and other. If yours looks different than this, then you need to update to the latest version. The top menu, we have OpenGL as a menu item. Now I have OpenGL for chart graphics set to yes. Toggling from no to yes, you'll have to restart Sierra chart after you do that. But make sure to save all the other changes you did first. I recommend experimenting with this on potentially an extra copy of Sierra chart rather than your main chart copy, just to make sure it runs well. If you have a very old graphics card, just keep this set to no. There are also some Windows operating settings changes that can be made. If I open up the control panel and search System, I'll click System and scroll down to the bottom and click Advanced System Settings. Under the Advanced tab, there's a Performance item. I'm going to click Settings. If all of these are checkmarked, that could hinder performance. You can uncheck all of them or just go through some of the main ones, but keeping them all checkmarked is not ideal. Another consideration, this is mostly to do with startup and load times, is managing the data folder. I'm going to open up the Sierra chart folder structure where I have it downloaded and then open up the data folder. If I sort the files by type, you can see the SCID files are in this area right here. If these files get too big, that could hinder performance. So regularly delete them, but keep in mind if you do this right before the market opens, your Sierra chart needs some time to re-download however many days of data you have set loaded. In the same data folder, there is also a market depth data folder, and you can regularly delete these files. This is just market depth for each symbol. In most cases, having all your charts on a chart book or split between a couple of chart books is sufficient, but some people require many charts. You may want to consider running multiple instances or copies of Sierra chart, but definitely read through the documentation on instances. If you know you have many charts, sometimes it's a good idea to throw some of the higher time frame charts on a second instance and execute your trades through the main instance. This essentially distributes the processing load more efficiently for your computer. So at the top of the SC menu, I'll click File and I'll hover Sub Instances. Then I'll click New Instance. Automatically, what looks like a new copy of Sierra chart has now opened. I'll put my higher time frame charts on this instance of Sierra chart. If I open up the Sierra chart file structure for my Sierra chart copy, we'll notice that there's now a Sierra chart instance 2 within the folder structure. If I open that up, you'll notice there's essentially an extra copy's worth of files for Sierra chart to use, including a separate data folder. You'll want to move the chart books that you want to use into this data folder. Many of the adjustments I've discussed today are found on this webpage where you search high CPU usage on Sierra chart. It's a good idea to give this page a read before you try any support tickets. Also make sure you're using the latest version of Sierra chart. We've now further optimized this workspace and we're ready to save it. it should feel significantly smoother and faster compared to before. I hope you found this video helpful. Consider liking and subscribing, as there will be more videos in the near future.